Whenever a discussion about the Crusades come up, we usually look through the lens of movies and legends. Typically, this depicts holy wars fought for God and glory. Some of these epic battles were in the desert sun. And while parts of that picture are accurate, the full reality of what it was actually like to be a crusader from the moment you sewed a cross on your tunic to the moment you either reached Jerusalem or didn't. But of course, traditional Hollywood doesn't tend to show this. Because here's the thing about the Crusades in specific. Before you ever drew a sword, you had to get there. And getting there across thousands of miles of hostile terrain, through foreign cities and mountain passes and rivers that could kill you just as surely as any enemy, was already a mission in itself. The journey to the Holy Land was not a march, it was a migration. Tens of thousands of men with their horses and weapons moved across continents toward a destination that many of them had never seen and couldn't fully picture. The logistics alone were staggering because leaders knew that the religious fervor that had convinced men to leave their homes, everything like their farms, along their lives, could only sustain itself for so long before exhaustion set in. Many crusaders took a route from Genoa to the Middle Eastern port of Antioch, totaling a stretch of almost 1,500 miles by sea. That required fleets which costed money, further requiring estimates and budgets to be drawn up and physically transported along with the army. During the Third Crusade, a large group of pilgrims gathered to make that leg of the journey and had to cross the Rhone River on a narrow bridge. The bridge collapsed under the weight of the crowd, where over 100 men fell into the river and were swept away. Nonetheless, that was before anyone had even left Europe. The water kept killing people. One of who fell victim was Frederick Barbarossa, a Holy Roman Emperor and the leader of the German Crusaders during that same Third Crusade. Barbarossa reached a river crossing in Seleucia and chose to ignore the advice of his council. As a result, he walked into the river fully armored. He was quickly swept away immediately and drowned. His army was left stricken with grief and completely demoralized, so went the other way and went home. Just one bad decision at a river crossing effectively ended the German contribution to an entire crusade. And even if you survived the journey, you arrived somewhere completely foreign. The climate alone was a shock because medieval Europeans were used to the cool, forested environment of the continent. The arid heat of the Middle East was a different world entirely. Therefore, the sanitary practices that worked in northern forests didn't work in desert conditions, and the Crusaders knew it. But what made them so great was the fact they adapted. Crusaders began attending the bathhouses that were standard in Muslim culture, adopting hard soap, which is believed to have been a Muslim invention that entered European practice specifically through this contact in the 12th century. The Crusaders arrived hygienically behind and left considerably more educated about personal cleanliness than when they came. It didn't always go smoothly. Muslim writers of the period noted the Crusaders' efforts with a mix of appreciation and exasperation. There are contemporary accounts of Europeans who adopted local hygiene practices, but managed to do so in ways that violated every understood custom. One account by the writer Usama ibn Mundik describes a Frankish knight in a male-only bathhouse who ripped the towel off an attendant and then brought his wife in and made the same demands. Whether the account is entirely accurate or partly embellished for effect, it captures how Muslim observers perceived the Crusaders, eager to be cleaner but unfamiliar with the rules of the space they were entering. Before anyone reached the Middle East, though, blood was already being spilled in Europe. The license given to Crusaders contained the sense of religious permission and moral authority that came with taking the cross. Power didn't stay neatly aimed at Muslims, but it turned on Jewish communities across Europe with devastating effect. Count Emicho of Leiningen led his army through cities along the Rhine and Danube, massacring Jewish populations as they went. Another contemporary writer named Albert of Aix documented one incident where Crusaders descended on a small group of Jewish citizens. Crusaders killed many of Jews, destroying their homes and synagogues before taking their money. Those who escaped fled by boat at night until they were caught and killed one by one. No official papal order authorized this, it happened anyway, driven by the same fervor that was supposed to be directed toward Jerusalem. By now, you're probably still wondering who went on the Crusades. The answer is more varied than most people expect, because yes, there were knights. However, there were also farmers along merchants, fleeing what they owed and seeking something they couldn't find at home. When Pope Urban II launched the First Crusade, he offered absolution from sin to anyone who participated. That was a powerful incentive in a world where fear of damnation was entirely real and entirely serious. Some people went for genuine faith or financial opportunity that came with conquest. Then again, some went because their king went, and they had no choice. By the time of the Third Crusade, large portions of the armies marching to Jerusalem were there primarily because of the monarchs leading them. When Barbarossa drowned at that river crossing, the proof of how much loyalty was tied to the person rather than the cause became immediately visible. Soldiers wept, with some of them abandoning their Christian faith entirely and joining Muslim forces in Turkey. Women were part of this holy mission too, despite the many repeated attempts to keep them out. The First Crusade in particular was almost spontaneous and migratory in character, as many men simply brought their wives and children. Women served as washerwomen and support personnel, but also in more active roles that contemporary accounts both confirm and argue about. During the Third Crusade, Muslim historians documented women fighting on the battlefield. One unnamed woman was recorded leading 500 knights and squires in raids against Muslim camps. The official European sources from the same crusade claim no women fought at all. Both couldn't be right, so someone was wrong, and the Muslim sources written closer to the events are considered by the more reliable account. And then there are the children. In 1212 CE, a shepherd boy named Stephen of Cloyes in France claimed to have received a letter directly from Jesus instructing him to preach a crusade. He brought it to King Philip II, who turned him away. Stephen started preaching anyway, allowing the fervor to spread. This resulted in armies formed in both France and Germany, eventually combining into a force estimated at somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000 people. Keep in mind, most of them children and adolescents, so when they crossed the Alps, many died before they reached Genoa. Some accounts went on to say they were captured and sold into slavery. Others say Pope Innocent III sent them home. None of them reached Jerusalem though, concluding the Children's Crusade as one of the more bewildering episodes of the era. For those who made it to the fight, daily life alternated between two very different states. Long stretches of waiting at first turned into sudden, overwhelming violence. Supply lines stretched across the known world thinned out quickly, and rations were consistently inadequate. Knights in full armor with no food had one option that most of them treated as a last resort: to eat the horse. But then a knight without a horse was significantly more vulnerable in battle and carried the stigma of making that choice. Accounts from the siege of Antioch go darker than that, suggesting that starvation pushed some crusaders to consider cannibalism. Overall, if you were captured, your fate depended almost entirely on who had taken you. Saladin, the brilliant Muslim commander, who became synonymous with the military, allowed Christian doctors to treat his Christian prisoners. After retaking Jerusalem in 1187, he released 1,000 of his captives at his brother's urging. He was, by the standards of the era, remarkably humane toward his prisoners. That was except for one group, notably called members of the Knights Templar. Knights received no mercy from Saladin under any circumstances. In fact, he had them massacred on sight. The Knights Templar are worth a moment on their own. They were originally created to protect Christian pilgrims in Jerusalem. Then the Pope endorsed them, granting freedom from taxation. When the organization exploded in size and ambition, they became a protection force along the entire Crusader route. Then a financial institution that essentially invented the concept of letters of credit, including a form of early banking that allowed Crusaders to deposit money in Europe and withdraw it in the Holy Land without carrying gold across a continent. A pilgrim protection force became one of the most powerful organizations in the medieval world, and a common man could join as a sergeant or foot soldier. He could also become a member of an institution that had more resources than the kings who were theoretically above it. One of the stranger details of the whole enterprise is the cross itself. Taking the cross meant committing to the crusade. It wasn't just a phrase, it was a literal practice, and every crusader was expected to physically sew a cross onto their clothing. It started informally, where rough fabric stitched on as a personal commitment. By the Third Crusade, it had become a system, and the color of your cross identified your nationality. Red for the French, silver for the English, green for the Flemish, allowed them to recognize each other, especially in a conflict fought across thousands of miles with armies drawn from a dozen different nations. The cross became the identifier for both faith and origin. The Crusades lasted nearly 2 centuries and touched virtually every corner of the medieval world. Cultural exchange happened precisely because people were thrown together across enormous distances in circumstances that forced adaptation. The hard soaps and the bathhouses, and the trade routes, and the architectural techniques that flowed back to Europe from the Middle East. And depending on what side of the coin you reside on, it sounds a lot like what we still see happening across Europe today. To see our last video covering the Outmans that's similar to this, be sure to click right here.